Good afternoon, everyone. Allison Schaberg here, Consolidated Planning Group. Thanks for joining us today. We are partnering today with Next Steps Transition, and they are a transition program that you can look into in the greater Houston area. We have a lot of people on today, so let me kind of just go through a couple of housekeeping items. We are in webinar mode today, and what that means to you is that we can't see you or hear you, but we do know you're there, and we're glad you're here. We aim to answer as many questions as we can during our time together today, and we are going for an hour. So for today, we're going from 12 to 1. For our members that join by podcast after the fact, if you would like a copy of the slides for the podcast, you can email us at contact@cpgcares.net, and we'll be happy to send you a copy of today's slides. Today's webinar is being recorded, and following today's presentation, you will get an email with a copy of the slides, so you don't have to take notes on everything you hear today, and you will also get a link to the recording as well. So just as a reminder, if you guys will put your questions in the chat box today, again, we will get to just as many as possible. Consolidated Planning Group, we are a holistic special needs financial planning firm with 30 years of experience. Our primary focus is serving the special needs community. I come to you as a parent of special needs as well as a professional, and we do a lot of webinars on a weekly basis surrounding topics for planning for special needs. And these webinars and podcasts were born out of my own frustration as a parent on how difficult everything is and navigating everything that we have to navigate as a parent, and how to not accidentally misstep and make a mistake to cause our kids to not qualify or to disqualify for any state or federally funded programs that they might be able to qualify for. We are an advisory consulting firm, so a lot of the families that come to us, they already have an advisor that they work with, and that's okay. We are just specifically nuanced in special needs, and to that point, there's about 250,000 financial advisors in the U.S., and only 125 total in the U.S. are really nuanced in special needs. And we explain that because our situation as a special needs parent is specialized, and special care is necessary. And I liken that to the same as if you have a medical problem, if you have a heart problem, you're going to go see a specialist, you're going to go see a cardiologist. You're not going to go to your PCP and get recommendations for the heart, and you're certainly not going to go see a podiatrist. It's kind of the same difference when it comes to planning for special needs. And another thing that I like to mention here is that there are differences of a special needs planning attorney or an estate planning attorney for special needs and what we do. So a lot of times we get calls on a regular basis, people saying, hey, I need help setting up guardianship, or I need to set up a special needs trust, or I need to update my will or estate planning documents. And those are going to be the attorneys, okay? I always say that they're the paper and we're the money. We're nationally certified as Social Security advisors and members of the Special Needs Planning Academy. People come to us because they need to know, how much do I need to fund my special needs trust? I have a child that has care needs for the rest of their life, not just the rest of mine, and I want to plan carefully for that. And careful consideration comes into that. So we're able to put those protection plans in place, do those future care cost estimates, lifetime care plans, transition planning. We help people set up ABLE accounts, and then we additionally we do a lot of advocacy. I see a question in the chat box. Do I need to get guardianship when I am already the child's parent? And that is a great question. And the answer is when your child is under 18, no, there is no guardianship that is necessary. You automatically have that. Of any minor children, special needs or not, you automatically have that. Where guardianship and those discussions and alternatives to guardianship come into play is when the child is turning 18. And, we make referrals to qualified attorneys to have those discussions. In the state of Texas, and I recognize that there might be people that are joining us from outside of the state. In the state of Texas, we do have alternatives to guardianship. There is such things as a partial guardianship, supported decision-making agreement, power of attorney, healthcare power of attorney, and a qualified attorney is really going to help you navigate what options are out there and what options are best. For full guardianship, there is a form that will have to be signed off on by a medical professional, a physician saying that the guardianship is necessary, and there are a lot of steps to go through for that. But what I will say is there is absolutely a lot of webinars on our Consolidated Planning Group YouTube channel about guardianship and the steps that you have to take and what those options are and what those different options mean, as well as special needs trust and other types of things when it comes to your legal documents. One more thing on your legal documents and the attorneys. What I would tell parents, and I say this all the time, there's a lot of things, we're smart people, and there's a lot of things that we have, do it yourself, the DIY projects and stuff. When it comes to your legal documents or having money in the right buckets and planning for special needs, this is not a DIY project. We do want you to work with a professional. A professional is going to be able to identify some of those roadblocks or pitfalls that you can fall in. So we even suggest, we have a lot of attorneys that we work with that are not nuanced in special needs, and they still hire an attorney that is nuanced in special needs for their own documents. So we say, if your brother says they'll do it for free, but they're really a real estate attorney or a business law attorney, you might not want to work with them. And a generalist that is not, not nuanced in special needs is not somebody that we would recommend as well. I see something else in the chat box. It says, how can I maximize the SSI monthly benefits if we have no mortgage? What expenses do we include to calculate? So we will talk about that, and if it slips my mind, we're going to get to the SSI and Medicaid and other benefits out there. So we will talk about how to maximize those benefits as well. So today what we're talking about really is the Medicaid waivers, and these Medicaid waivers, all states, so if you're joining from out of state, all states have Medicaid waivers. And so the waivers that we're going to be talking about today are going to be specific to Texas, but just so you know, every single state has a list of Medicaid waivers. They may be a little bit different in what they offer and who they're for, but all states have Medicaid waivers. And the important thing that we should first start talking about is, because they are Medicaid waivers, you need to maintain the eligibility for Medicaid for your loved one, whether they're a minor. A lot of families, when their children are minors, they don't qualify for Medicaid. They make too much money. They have too much assets. A lot of these waivers that we're talking about right now have individual qualifications for the individual with a disability and are not based off of the parent's income and assets. Now, that is different for SSI Medicaid. There are 109 Medicaid programs in the state of Texas. So it starts getting a little dicey and confusing when we start talking about all of these things. But so today we're talking about the Medicaid waivers, home and community-based waivers. One of the things that is commonly thrown around in the special needs community around here is your child on the interest list, or are they on the waiting list, or how long have they been on the waiting list? So it's true, in the state of Texas, we have a very, very long waiting list for these waivers, and that is the time from the time that you get your loved one on this waiting list until you actually are approved for services. Some would suggest that the waiting list is about 17 years. So if you don't have your child or children on the waiting list, you do want to make sure that you get them on the list. And today, in the slides today, we're going to explain exactly how to get on the list, how to check your status on the list, and what have you. So one thing for sure, when it comes to these Medicaid waivers, they like acronyms. So they all have a full name. And they all have a little acronym that goes along with them. So we've got those on here for you. So we've got the CLASS waiver, the Community Living Assistance and Support Services. We have DBMD, say that 3 times fast, deaf blind with multiple disabilities. Home and community-based services is also known as HCS. We have the Texas Home Living, TXHML. We have MDCP, which is Medically Dependent Children's Program. The STAR Plus waiver, which is an 1115 demonstration waiver. We have the Youth Empowerment Services waiver, also known as the YES waiver. And we also have the Community First Choice CFC waiver. So all of these waivers have a different criteria to qualify for these waivers, and I'm going to go through a lot of that. Starting with class, all of these waivers, for the most part, have an IQ requirement of intellectual disability, which for the state of Texas, we're looking at an IQ of 70 or below, or 75 and below with multiple disabilities. Class is one waiver that doesn't have an IQ requirement. So a lot of families have a loved one with a disability, but they might not have an intellectual disability. So the class waiver would be the most likely one that they would qualify for. They could come up on the list for the other ones, but they may not qualify for them without having that intellectual disability. Now, one thing that I would say is, even if your loved one doesn't have an intellectual disability, I would go ahead and put them on the other list as well. Things change, life changes, new diagnoses happen. And we've seen people that have a loved one with a disability that didn't have an intellectual disability that later tested that they did have an intellectual disability. So if you didn't put them on the list because you thought that they would never qualify, later when it comes up that they do have an intellectual disability, then you're going to be on a really long wait list for that. So let's talk about the class. Class waiver gives home and community-based services and supports to children and adults with related conditions. There's over 200 related conditions like cerebral palsy, spina bifida. The related condition must have occurred before the child was age 22. So again, there's a lot of conditions out there. One place that is a good place that you can read about a lot of the waivers is Navigate Life Texas. It is a website for people with disabilities, and it does have a breakdown and a document on every single one of these waivers. So that's Navigate Life Texas. We have the deaf blind multiple disabilities, and that is exactly what it sounds like. It gives services for children and adults who are deaf and blind and have a related condition that could lead to deaf or blindness, and maybe have another disability. So maybe an individual is deaf and blind and they have Down syndrome or something, any third disability, basically. The waiting list for the DBMD is much shorter, and people can get services a lot quicker on that particular waiver, but it is a much smaller subset of the population that would qualify for that. Someone says in the chat box, what do I need to do to give access to my son financially if something happens to me? And we will talk about that as well. That's going to be a special needs trust. There's really 2 places that we can have money above and beyond the means-based test for SSI and Medicaid. Right now, the means that they count is $2,000. So if a person has more than $2,000 in their name, then they would essentially disqualify for Medicaid and these waivers as well. So the 2 places that we can have money above and beyond $2,000 is an ABLE account, and these are things that we can set up for families. And then there is a special needs trust. A special needs trust will provide for the future care needs for your loved one after you're gone. And so those are the 2 places and the things that you need to be thinking about. We'll talk a little bit more about this during this meeting. The next one is our HCS waiver, the Home and Community-Based Service Waiver. This gives services and supports to children and adults with an intellectual disability or related condition who live with their families in their own homes or small group homes with no more than 4 people. So I would say 40 years ago, there was kind of the overall general consensus is that if you have a loved one with a disability, that they should be institutionalized, that would be the best place for them. And these waivers, the whole point of these waivers, and when you talk about our kids being on these waivers interest lists, and then a lot of people say, I don't even know what this is for. The whole point of these Medicaid waivers is to waive off some of the costs of care associated for caring for an individual with a disability. It might pay for attendant services, respite services, various therapies. It might pay for various home modifications that are necessary because of the disability. Those are all reasons and all things that these waivers may pay for. And the whole point of it is to keep your loved one in home and community-based services. So there's really been a paradigm shift of thinking of what is best for an individual with a disability. And although many, many years ago, the thought was we should institutionalize these folks, which was crazy, and they used crazy terms when they referred to individuals with a disability. That doesn't happen anymore. And what they know now is for sure that home and community-based services are going to be the best for our loved ones in most cases. There are exceptions to those rules as well. Then we have our Medically Dependent Children Program, MDCP. This gives services to children and adults who are 20 and younger who are medically fragile as an alternative to receiving services in a nursing facility. Thoughts of, being medically fragile. It could be a trach, it could be a G-tube, it could be maybe a loved one that is on a ventilator or some type of breathing help or things like that. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why people qualify for MDCP, but think that that equipment is necessary for life-sustaining measures when it comes to MDCP. So it's not usually where, like say somebody is on the autism spectrum and they have, maybe they have some meltdowns and some issues with that, or frontal lobe issues, but they don't have any other major, things that would be considered fragile. They might not qualify for MDCP. So someone says, so for HCS, does it require an IQ test? And do they do that once you're eligible for it? And that is exactly right. You don't have to prove to be eligible to get on the list, any of the waivers interest lists. You don't have to prove to be eligible at the time that you get on the list. You're going to prove to be eligible at the time that you come up on the list. And that is when they're going to do the IQ test, and they're going to determine what they refer to, another acronym, LON, level of need. There is a level of need scale that they'll take you through, and that is at the time that you qualify for the waiver. So we have the STAR Plus Home and Community-Based Waiver, HCBS. This gives services to adults and adults age 21 and over to keep them in their community and not in a nursing home facility. Services are typically offered through a managed care organization, MCO. And an example of a managed care organization, it could be, there's various providers that are contracted, and then also you may end up having like a STAR Plus program through United Healthcare. That could be an example. You can get on this list at age 21, and the list isn't very long on that one as well. Then we have our Texas Home Living. This gives services to children and adults with an intellectual disability or a related condition who live in their own home or their family's home. Again, this particular waiver is for intellectual disability. IQ 70 or below is what they're looking for, or 75 and below with multiple disabilities. The Yes Empowerment Service Waiver, this is a great one. This is for adolescents under age 19, okay? And I like this one because it's kind of like the best kept secret. Everybody's heard of the HCS and CLASS and Texas Home Living, but not everybody has heard of the Yes waiver. And this is a 1915C Medicaid program that gives home and community-based services to children under the age of 19 with serious mental, emotional, and behavioral difficulties. And that has to be the main issue. It can't be their primary diagnosis is Down syndrome and they have all of these other things. It has to be that their main issues are mental, emotional, and behavioral difficulties. It could be ADHD, high functioning autism that they would likely take. So when we're thinking of the mental, emotional, and behavioral difficulties, we're thinking of, I always say, all of the alphabet soup of the, ADHD, BPD, OCD, a lot of the, anxiety, depression. This could be kids that are at risk of running away. They may have had some drug interactions. They may have had some police interactions. And I'm not saying all of these things. It could be any number of these things, but they're basically at-risk youth is who this is for. And this is really a wraparound program to help support the family, to help keep the child out of a mental institution or a mental, residential situation in that example. Okay, someone says, do you have any insight on the Harris County Health IDD program and what resources do they offer? So we're going to get to the local intellectual disability authorities. The Harris Center is the local intellectual disability authority. Some people call it a LIDA, some people call it a LIDA. I don't know which one it is, but it's the Intellectual Disability Authority. And the Harris Center is that for Harris County, and we're going to talk about other counties. Every county has a local intellectual disability authority, and a lot of these authorities is where you're going to get on most of these waivers on the interest list. There are some separate phone numbers for class and Star Plus and things like that. We're going to talk about that as well. The community, one last thing on the YES waiver is many counties, there's not a wait list for the YES waiver. So if you have a child that's struggling with any of these things, self-harm might be another thing. I know that's very prevalent in adolescents right now. Don't be afraid to reach out. The YES waiver is a good waiver, and a lot of them don't have waiting lists. This isn't a long-term waiver. It's usually 12 to 18 months, designed to get the individual back to center, really, and out of an institution. Okay, so the community first choice. This is a newer one. This allows states to provide home and community-based attendance services and supports to Medicaid recipients with disabilities. They'll help with activities of daily living, health-related tasks, hands-on assistance, supervision, cueing. It's really designed to help them care for themselves. These services are also offered through a managed care organization, and this is an entitlement. The list isn't very long, typically a year or less for the community first choice. Someone says in the chat box, would you have to choose between HCS and Texas Home Living? One is for group living and other at home. Is Texas Home Living for if you want a caregiver to take care of your child at home? They both have attendant services, and the answer is yes, because you can basically only have one waiver at a time. And usually you're going to come up on the list for Texas Home Living first before you come up on the waiting list for the HCS waiver. And so we've had people call in a panic before of, well, which one do I pick? And, and the answer is it depends. If you ask around in the special needs community will tell you the HCS waiver is the best one. The budget is bigger in the HCS waiver, but it may not pay for some of the therapies that, a lot of the therapies and things might have been covered by the Texas Home Living waiver that might not be covered by the HCS waiver. So I would say my advice is that each family needs to really choose carefully in what your child's needs are, because it just depends. So to say that one is better than the other, it absolutely just depends on the child. So, and then another person said, how can these waivers help as it pertains to housing? And so it depends on, what waivers are out there. There are some waivers that will pay for the home and community-based housing, and it might offset some of the housing if a person lives in their own home, their family home, or if they're in a small group home, it will offset some of those costs as well. And it depends on which waiver you're on whether or not it covers housing. But again, these waivers, again, respite services, attendant services, various therapies, some home modifications, and again, all of the budgets for these waivers are vastly different. And one thing I would also suggest to people is that you come up on the waiver and say, I don't need it. It's a bad idea. We've definitely worked with families in the past that were on the waiting list for 15 to 17 years, and they came up on the list. Maybe the family's affluent, they have enough money, and they just feel like they don't need it, and they say that they don't need it. And then a year or two later, they are, really feeling like they should have done that. Okay, so we're going to give, I see in the chat box asking on how to get on the list, and that is going to be through your local authority, and we're going to get to that. Can you receive service from the first one you get, then change to the HCS? Yes, you can. So if you get Texas Home Living, for example, it doesn't take you off the list for the HCS. Later, when you come up on the HCS, then they'll tell you you're up on that list, and then you can make a decision on which might be the best one for you. And then a person says, would a child qualify for the yes waiver if there's both serious mental, emotional, and behavioral difficulties and intellectually disabled? And that would, I would say that it's worth checking into. It is worth checking into on that, and that would be with the local authority, and you can check with them on that. I don't get to pick on who they select and who they take for the yes waiver. I think it depends on how well the individual with an intellectual disability is functioning. If they're very, very low functioning, I would say that they're probably not going to take them. But they're going to go through a complete assessment, and it's a case-by-case basis. It's very, very individualized. I'm not the picker of that. I would say it is worth checking into for sure if you're dealing with some of the emotional and behavioral difficulties. Then I see if a child has an HCS waiver and switches to community first choice, can they transfer back if it doesn't work out without waiting? And the answer is no. And I would not switch to community first choice from the HCS waiver, because again, that would be like a 17-year waiting list on that. Okay, so services available in all waivers: adaptive age, financial management services, supported employment, employment assistance, minor home modifications, respite. Services in all but MDCP include the professional therapies, OT, PT, speech therapy, music, massage, rec, equine, art. There's so many different various forms of therapy that can be included in some of these waivers. Unlimited prescriptions, dental, nursing, that just names a few. On the HCS waiver, can a parent be paid as the caregiver? What about if the parent has guardianship? Can they still be paid a paid provider through the HCS waiver program? And a parent can be paid through the HCS waiver program if the individual with a disability is over age 18. A parent can be paid as a provider. We've also seen where families have a sibling paid as a provider, or they might have a parent or a grandparent paid as a provider as well. Those are things as well. In any of these waivers, you have a caseworker, and the caseworker will kind of walk you through these things and go through, what you have to do once you come up on the list and when the testing is going to occur, and it'll take you through the entire process and explain all of that to you. Some other waiver services provide transportation to and from doctor's appointments, residential services, equine therapy. Dayhab, they've changed the name. They're not liking the name Dayhab anymore. And the Dayhabs are adjusting what they're calling themselves going forward. But basically, some of those transition service programs, I would use the word transition programs, might be an example of some of the things that the waiver might pay for as well. Okay, so waiver general eligibility. So again, most waivers are for all ages, for the exception of MDCP and STAR Plus. The financial eligibility for all waivers is 300% of SSI. So right now, SSI is $914 a month. So if we said 300% of SSI, the individual with a disability's income cannot be higher than $2,742 a month. So this is the income requirement that the individual's income needs to be lower than $2,742, but the number is always 300% of SSI. And again, for these waivers, it does not look at parental income. So I'm glad you're here. A lot of times, a lot of families say we make too much money, we don't qualify, why should I even listen to this? We're not going to qualify. But this is based off of the kids' income and assets and not yours. That's different for SSI, and we are going to get to that. I just want to mention that. But individuals must meet the functional eligibility criteria for the specific waiver. And as I mentioned earlier, that determination is made when they come up on the list, not when they go on the list. So it's important to note that. And so again, getting them on the list, you don't have to know if they're going to qualify or not right now. Just get them on the list, and that will be determined later. I think I can't stress that enough. So there's two funding pathways for these waivers. It's first come, first serve, and we talked about the waiting list being as long as 17 years for some of them. We've talked about some of the other ones that really don't have much of a waiting list, the community first choice, the YES waiver, the STAR Plus waiver. Some of those don't have the 17-year waiting list. Where we're talking about the 17-year waiting list, we're talking more about CLAS, HCS, and Texas Home Living, okay? But again, these are designed to promote independence and to prevent or divert individuals from institutions. It's designed to address crisis, which we're going to talk about crisis. So for the person that indicated severe emotional disturbances and things like that, we're going to talk about a crisis diversion slot in a moment. And this is also designed to promote independence by helping individuals that were already in institutionalized to move back into home and community-based services. So that's an example of that. Okay, this is a very, very important slide that we have up. This is what is your local intellectual disability authority, okay? So how to get on the wait list. So if your loved one is not on the wait list or you don't know, this is going to be an important slide. And again, for anybody that joined late, everybody's getting a copy of today's slides, and they're getting a copy of the recording. If you're attending this by podcast, you can email us at contact@cpgcares.net and get a copy of today's slides. But so a lot of times what we find is that people say, oh yeah, my child is on all of the interest lists. And what we find out is no, as a matter of fact, they called their local authority, for instance, the Harris Center, somebody mentioned earlier, and their child is on the interest list for HCS, Texas Home Living, and possibly Community First Choice. So to get on HCS, Texas Home Living, Community First Choice, you're going to need to call your local authority. Harris County is going to be the Harris Center. Fort Bend County is going to be Texana. And this link here, you can find out who your local authority is. You're going to put that link in your browser. You're going to put in your zip code, and it is going to tell you who your local intellectual disability authority is. And that is who you're going to call to get on HCS, Texas Home Living, and Community First Choice. There is a separate phone number for MDCP, CLAS, and DBMD. It is very, very important that you call that separate phone number to get them on those lists, because if you only call your local authority, you will not be on those other lists that I've just mentioned. And then yet there is another phone number for the STAR Plus waiver for the 21 and over. So this is how you're going to get on those interest lists. But what if you move, okay? So let's use the example since we've been talking about Harris Center. Let's say that you're in Harris County, Houston, Texas, and you move to Sugar Land, Fort Bend County. Your local authority is going to change. You're going to move from the Harris Center to the Texana Center. But you're not going to lose your place in line. Your case is just going to be moved to the appropriate county. So Another thing that is interesting about our Texas waivers and interest list, there's no website that you can just go to yourself and put yourself on the list and log in and see where your child is on the list. You actually do have to call that class phone number, call your local authority to get on the list, and you also, they usually send a letter every 2 years letting you know that your child is still on the list and where they are on the list. Sometimes those letters go out, sometimes they don't. They regularly went out prior to COVID. I think there was some delay in some of those letters when COVID was happening, but I think they're picking up the pieces from that. But if you don't hear from them, you are going to want to call and see where your child is on the list. And sometimes that letter will say, we want to know that you still want to be on the list. Can you please call us and confirm? And if they don't hear from you, they can take you off the list. So just pay attention to that. Another thing, too, that I would recommend is that when you get on these lists, you're going to get a letter in the mail saying that you were on the list and the date that you got on the list. I strongly suggest holding on to that letter. You never know, there could be computer issues or anything else. So I would suggest holding on to that letter. 17 years is a long time. All right, the crisis diversion slots. This is something that I think is important. We have seen a lot of families in crisis over the years, especially through COVID. I mean, things that were already difficult got a lot worse in COVID, and I know we're emerging from all of that. But there is a such thing as a crisis diversion slot for the HCS waiver. And basically what the crisis diversion slot moves you from a 17-year wait list to right now, okay, that you're going to qualify, that your loved one's going to qualify for an HCS waiver. An example of a crisis diversion, there's many examples of crisis, so I don't want you to just take what I'm saying as the only idea of crisis. Think about, is your loved one a threat to themselves or others? Are they at risk of being placed outside the home? Have they been suicidal? Have they hurt people? Those are examples of crisis. Another example of a crisis, it doesn't always have to be the child, right? Like we had one last year which was a crisis. It was an adult with a disability, an intellectual disability, and both parents died. Okay, that is a crisis. Okay, so that crisis diversion slot comes into play. Another example of a crisis diversion slot is how about you're a caregiver and you were diagnosed with something horrible, and now you have to seek treatment, so you cannot provide the same caregiving services to your child. And as a result, your child is at risk of being placed outside the home. That's the whole point, is it's trying to divert the crisis and prevent the child from being, or individual with a disability, to prevent them from being placed outside the home. We saw one in the last 2 years where it was a single dad who moved his parent here from out of state, and the loved one was on the autism spectrum. He had become big, and he was very aggressive, and he was trying to hurt grandma. And dad had to work because somebody's got to pay the bills and somebody's got to have health insurance, and we were able to get them a crisis diversion slot. We saw another one, similar situation, adult with a disability who was, the grandparents had basically guardianship. Grandma passed away. Grandpa was still working. The individual was a threat to themselves or others, could not be left alone. Grandpa couldn't not work, had to work, and we were able to get a crisis diversion slot in that example. So I just want to remind you that on these HCS crisis diversion slots, unfortunately, for families that have a loved one that is a threat to themselves or others, if that loved one that is a threat to themselves or others does not have an intellectual disability with an IQ below 70 or 75 and below, with multiple disabilities, there is no crisis diversion slot available for that individual. It's unfortunate. I wish they would change that. There are a lot of families that fall into that category and they truly need help, but their child doesn't have an intellectual disability. So then we have the PASRR, is a diversion and transition from nursing facilities or specialized services. Again, this is for someone who's already institutionalized and transitioning out, okay? All right, so let me go to the chat box here and make sure that we've answered the question. Okay, for the HCS crisis diversion slot, does the individual have to be inpatient in order to qualify? No, they do not. There's different requirements, and they'll go through all of that. I know that some people talk about that, like one overnight stay in a nursing facility or a hospital or things like that, but there are different organizations. So if you found yourself in crisis, I should go back to say this. If you found yourself in crisis, your first point of contact is your local authority. All of the local authorities, every county have a crisis line. It's a 24/7 line, okay? That is your first point of contact. Sometimes the local authority is extremely helpful, and other times they are not. Other times it's slow to go, or they're getting no response, or the family might be hitting a brick wall with the local authority. That's not always the case. They're working very hard, and like everybody else, being understaffed and those types of things are issues that your local authority have as well. But your first point of contact is your local authority and the emergency line. And then if you're not getting anywhere, there is another organization called Every Child. They're based out of Austin, but they have, advocates, boots on the ground in every major city. So I'm talking Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, Austin, and in those surrounding areas. They have boots on the ground there. So Every Child has also been instrumental in getting your local authority moving or getting things taken care of. Also, the ARC of Texas has also been helpful. And of course, you can contact us because you don't have to know all of this. I hope you don't ever have a crisis, but if you do, just know that there is some help out there. Okay, let's see. What if you don't have much money and need a special needs trust? Is there a sliding scale? I think that you're referring to you need a special needs trust, and as far as like a sliding scale of where they charge less to set up the trust for a person with lower assets. And I haven't seen that. Most attorneys, all attorneys set their own prices for sure. There is Disability Rights Texas. Sometimes you can get financial aid through Disability Rights Texas and helping set up a trust. There's also legal aid programs throughout Texas as well that you can check into. And then also through the ARC of Texas, there is the Texas Master Pooled Trust. And if there isn't a lot of money in play, you might consider doing the Master Pool Trust. In the meantime, while you're getting where you're going financially, that might be an option. Typically, we see people have their individual special needs trust as opposed to the Master Pool Trust. But if, the cost of setting up the trust is problematic, then the Master Pool Trust might be something worth looking into. So let's talk about how we get started with special needs planning. First, we want to make sure that you're working with a special needs planner to help you formulate a plan. As I mentioned earlier, it's important that you understand the difference between a special needs planner and a special needs attorney. We are not here to rain on any other professionals out there and how great they are, but they're really good at what they do, okay? A special needs planner, a special needs attorney is nuanced specifically in special needs, and they're really good and well-versed in what they do, okay? So I think it's very, very important because some people say, well, I only need help with the special needs. The special needs and the finance, it all comes together because ultimately as parents, we are the funders of our retirement. We're the funders of our life, of daily bills and monthly bills and things like that. But we're the funders of our retirement. We can spend 25 to 35 years in retirement, but when we have a special needs child that may have care needs the rest of their life, that's like another bucket for retirement. So you really have to plan carefully, and ultimately it's all out of your buckets, right? So that's why it comes all in together, your own financial planning and planning for special needs and how we fund the special needs trust. So to get started, we recommend that you gather all the necessary planning documents. What does that look like? These are your statements. These are stocks, bonds, mutual funds, pensions, 401ks, 403bs. These are your Social Security statements, in your full earnings record through the Social Security Administration. Any legal documents that you may already have in place, like wills or trusts, special needs trust, any other guardianship, those are kind of all of the planning documents. Okay, so that's the first things first. And we suggest developing a letter of intent. On our YouTube channel, as I mentioned, we do webinars every week on special needs topics and planning topics. All of our webinars are free. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel for free as well. And there's over 200 webinars out there, and you can peruse the topics for the ones that are of interest to you and kind of the planning step that you're on. But we do have a complete webinar on a letter of intent. I liken a letter of intent as a family love letter, okay? It's not a legal document, but it kind of goes alongside some of your other planning documents like wills and trust. And when I call it a family love letter, as caregivers and parents of individuals with a disability, we have forgotten more than anybody will ever know as it relates to planning for our loved one. But what if you're incapacitated? What if you're no longer here on this earth? Who else knows all of this information? And what I will tell you is sometimes the spouse in your own house does not know all of these things. A lot of times we see that one individual is a caregiver and the other individual is the worker, and the worker works on making money and the caregiver works on caregiving services and handling appointments and meds and all of that kind of stuff. We have a template. It's a 20-page form fillable document that allows you to fill it out. We tell you never to fill it out in one setting. It'll take too long. It's too much. But it's everything about your loved one, their full name, what county were they born in, what's their date of birth, what's their social, who are their doctors, names, address, and phone numbers of doctors, what are their diagnoses, primary, secondary, what medications do they take, what are they for, what schools have they attended, what makes them thrive and do well, and what makes them fall apart. So many things, religious preferences, but also there's a lot of free space in there where a parent can really free type their heart. My heart for my child is this. If you really needed to know something, you really need to know X, Y, Z. And because what this is I'm trying to do is if somebody else had to fall into your shoes because you no longer could care for your loved one, they're able to pick up this document and try to pick up where you left off without trying to rip the house apart in the bottom of the floorboard of the car or in the bottom of the file cabinet and ripping through closets trying to figure out this information. It's going to make transition quite a bit smoother. And today, what we will do, we will send a copy of the letter of intent, our form fillable letter of intent. We'll send a copy of that when we send out today's slides, as well as the recording. We'll send you the form fillable PDF of the letter of intent so you can have that for your records. You can create your own. You can download one off the internet. We'll send you our copy, but what we do recommend is that you revisit this letter of intent a couple times a year. Some individuals' diagnoses are pretty fluid and changing rapidly, and others are the same as they were 15 years ago. But as things change, make sure to update your letter of intent. There's a lot of personal information on this, so you may or may not want to share it with the successor guardian. If you don't want to share all of the details with the successor guardian now, at least let the successor guardian and your spouse know where this letter of intent lives and how they could get their hands on it if something happens to you. But we want you to really think about your vision of how you hope things will look for your special needs child, but as importantly, how you hope things will look for yourself and your own retirement. You and your spouse, if you're married, and your own retirement, what does that look like? Because when we have a special needs child that has care needs for the rest of their life, your vision of retirement is different. The actuality of your retirement is different than that of families that have only neurotypical kids. And it's really important that we find balance in that journey because you're in for the marathon, not the sprints. And having balance and respite for your own for your own sanity and some of the vision that you hoped for your retirement. Maybe there was some travel involved or other things like that. But I think parents don't have to be told to look out for their kids, because that's what we always do. We're always looking out for our kids. And sometimes it's to a fault to our own health and our own demise, because we put ourselves on the back burner. So I think it's really, really important to pay attention to that. So when it comes to funding for your child and their future needs, certainly a special needs trust is a place. Again, a special needs trust and an ABLE account are two places that we can have money above and beyond the means-based test for Medicaid, the $2,000, without counting against them. So some people ask all the time, why should I have a special needs trust and an ABLE account? And the reason is simple. The special needs trust can have an unlimited amount of money, okay? It can have an unlimited amount of money in there. The ABLE account, before a person disqualifies for SSI and Medicaid, can only have $100,000. So if there's more than $100,000, they would disqualify for an ABLE for SSI and Medicaid. The ABLE account can pay for food and shelter without a 1/3 reduction to SSI. A special needs trust can pay for food and shelter, but there would be a 1/3 reduction to SSI. So those are some of the differences of a special needs trust. And furthermore, we can leave our life insurance proceeds to a special needs trust or leave an inheritance to a special needs trust, but you cannot leave an inheritance to an ABLE account. It is very, very important that we don't leave, we do not set up our individual, our loved one with a disability, as a direct beneficiary on anything we have: life insurance, pensions, 401k, 403b, anything you have, bank accounts. We don't want to leave our individual with a disability directly as a beneficiary in any of those things. The right way to do it is to set it up for the benefit of said child to their special needs trust. So it might be the supplemental needs trust is the name that sometimes we hear, the third party trust, the supplemental needs trust for the benefit of John Smith, or the third party special needs trust for the benefit of John Smith would be an example of this. It is important that we preserve our eligibility for state and federally funded programs. We've been talking about the Medicaid waivers, and we got to maintain our eligibility for Medicaid. And those requirements for Medicaid are exactly the same requirements for SSI. But the difference is on the Medicaid waivers, it's based off of the individual's assets and income we were talking about. When it comes to SSI and Medicaid, if your child is a minor under age 18, it is based off of the parent's income and assets, not the child's. So if you've applied for SSI before and you were denied and you were frustrated because clearly your child is disabled, it's because it's based off of your income and assets until they turn 18. Once they turn 18, it's based off of their income and assets. So it's important not to have more than $2,000 in their name. If they have more than $2,000 in their name, there's no such thing as hiding it. It is a legitimate move to move that money into an ABLE account or to a first-party special needs trust. It is a legitimate move to spend down that money so it's lower than $2,000 for their benefit, and you'll want to keep receipts for that. But those are basically the two places that you can have money above and beyond the $2,000. We've got a few things in the chat box. Let me have a look here. Okay, someone says they're thankful for their webinar. Thank you for that. And the documents, I've been thinking about needing to do these. I think we're talking about the letter of intent. And so, yes, I'm happy to share that. You know, as a person, as a parent with kids with disabilities, it pains me how difficult everything is. I eat, sleep, and breathe this. This is what we do for a living. Our whole firm is this. And I personally thought it was difficult, you know, kind of transitioning our kids and things like that. So we are certainly happy to provide help with these things. So what I want to talk to you, I'm not going to have enough time to go all over Social Security, SSI. It's an animal in itself, okay? But SSI is a means-based program. It is for the indigent and the disabled. The indigent, less than $2,000 in their name, and the disabled, okay? SSI right now is $914 per month, okay? $914 per month, and it comes along with Medicaid. If your loved one is getting less than $914 per month, you probably need to send in a rent agreement saying that the individual is paying rent. There's a such thing as a rent agreement. There's such thing as a fair share agreement. I'm a fan of the rent agreement. The fair share agreement, someone mentioned in the chat box earlier, how do I charge rent if I don't have a mortgage? You can totally charge rent if you don't have a mortgage. What you can't do is do a fair share agreement. A fair share in the eyes of the Social Security is the number of people in the household. You take the rent or the mortgage, you take the utilities and the cost of food and divide it by the number of people in the household. That's how fair share is determined. But a rent agreement, we have a one-pager for that. That you just put in that they're paying rent, and each month you move that amount of rent from their account to your account. You can turn right around and put that money in the ABLE account, and you got to submit that rent agreement to the Social Security Administration for them to increase the amount. So Social Security SSDI, this is a worker-based program. We pay into the system. But there is something called childhood disability benefits under a parent's record. So when your child has a disability that started prior to age 22, they have the ability to be covered under a parent's record when a parent either retires or go on Social Security. So maintaining proof that your child's disability started prior to age 22 is going to be important. Guys, we have entire webinars on our YouTube channel. Like I said, the Social Security topic, SSI and Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, it is an animal topic in itself, but we have an entire webinar dedicated to that. Likewise, we are nationally certified as Social Security advisors, members of the Special Needs Planning Academy, so we can help in your one-off questions on this because it is very, very confusing. One person said in the chat box, our attorney has indicated that since we have guardianship that our son cannot sign a rent agreement. How do we do an agreement if they cannot sign? So I guess that it is true that you would just do the rent agreement. You would sign the rent agreement, that the rent agreement is in place, and submit that rent agreement that way, and then move the rent from the rep payee account where the SSI goes to your own account, because it is true that when a person has guardianship that individual doesn't sign on their own accord. Someone says, I've attended many of your webinars and many presentations multiple times, and I can say each time I walk away with something new. I'm so glad for that. That is my heart. It is my heart. That's the method behind the madness on these webinars, is we want to educate you. We want to advocate. We want you to be able to advocate for your child, and if nothing else, feel empowered, because so oftentimes as parents, we feel kicked down, or all these roadblocks. We're forever running into these roadblocks, and it's frustrating. Or, the chatter around the special needs community of, well, don't mess that up, or if you say this is going to happen. And like the fear, it infuriates me, the fear that as families we feel on what not to do. And so we really try at Consolidated Planning Group to empower you and give you the tools and resources that you need to be successful. Guys, these are things to keep on your special needs planning radar. How to develop a comprehensive special needs care plan. We are going to help with that. How much do you need to fund the Special Needs Trust? We're able to do those future care cost estimates. What we say is we want you to plan for the worst and hope for the best. And when the best happens, then great. You have a more lucrative retirement. Maybe you can retire earlier. Maybe you can do more trips than you had planned, or what have you. We talked about the waivers today. SSI and SSDI, understanding the differences and knowing when to apply. You can check that out on our YouTube channel. ABLE accounts, how to fund them. We're great at helping you open an ABLE account. We talked about the beneficiary designations and how very important it is not to have your special needs child named directly as a beneficiary. Super, super important. If you've done it, don't beat yourself up. And if you have done it, you're like 95% of people, so you can rest assured there. But the cool thing is you can fix this, okay? You just need to call and get beneficiary change forms. And you can change that beneficiary and you can fix that. And once you have your special needs trust set up, then you can make the beneficiary the special needs trust for the benefit of said child. We do suggest if you have residential, there are a lot of residential living communities out there that are awesome. We have some speed dating webinars on our YouTube channel that basically has like 12 to 15 different places out there. And they say who we are, where we're located, who we serve, how much we cost, and whether or not we take waivers. So if you have an hour, if you're thinking about, a lot of families want autonomy. They want the child to have some independence, as much independence as they can. And it also gives balance for their own retirement. And a lot of families are thinking about this of where they go after I'm gone. But look at those. And some of these waiting lists can be long. So you're going to want to tour those sooner versus later to get on the list. Also on our YouTube channel, I mentioned that there's full webinars on guardianship and alternatives to guardianship. Post-high school education options. Guys, there are a ton of educational options for kids with even intellectual disabilities out there, and that is all on our YouTube channel as well. Our slides today are going to have a link for our upcoming webinars, and you can register for those in the future. We're glad you're here. We hope you'll come back. Again, we work on a collaborative team here at CPG, nationally certified Social Security advisors, members of the Special Needs Planning Academy. It's not just me. Michelle does a lot of our webinars as well. But we are here to help you in your planning journey. And it doesn't matter that you already have an advisor. That's totally cool. Most people do. We're here to help consult and look at what you already have in place. I always tell people it's really not about beating yourself about what you haven't done. Some people say, I'm embarrassed to show you what I've done or what I haven't done. It's not about looking back. It's about looking forward and taking those steps. And I call them intentional, incremental steps to get to where you want to be. How much longer are you going to work? Are you already retired and thinking about next? Do you have another 15 or 20 years to work that, turning the knobs incrementally can make a difference in your overall plan for yourself and for your loved one? We can definitely help on all of that. What we have on the screen here is our QR code. It takes us to an appointment link where you can schedule yourself for a free consultation. All of our consultations are free. We want to learn more about you, the planning that you've done so far, what questions you have, and how we can help you build on the foundation that you have already set up. So certainly, I got 1:02, so I'm 2 minutes over. I'm sorry for that. It's certainly been my pleasure being here with you today. I do see one more question. If you do a rent agreement with SSI, won't we have to claim it on our tax returns? That's a good question. Usually the fair share agreement, you don't have to claim on your tax returns. Some would argue that if you're charging rent, then you should put that on your tax return. And what I have found is that every CPA says something else. I always recommend working with a CPA. We do have a CPA that we refer to in the greater Houston area that is nuanced and special needs, so she'll be able to help you with that. And someone said, where can I find a copy of a rental agreement to maximize my SSI eligibility? You can reach out to our team for that as well, and we can get that out to you. It's a simple document. You can create it on your own on a Word document, just saying that your loved one is paying $500 a month, for instance, rent, and that they're paying the same that you would charge any boarder, and that, that is their portion for food and shelter is basically how that works. Guys, we're out of time for today. Certainly been my pleasure. Schedule with us for your personalized consultation. If you had questions that you didn't want to ask in a group forum today, certainly understand you guys had great questions, and we look forward to working with you in the future. Thanks so much, everyone. Take care.